أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. So once he's done with once Ayatollah Jawad is done with the nafs-centeredness and that main enemy, he moves on to another enemy, which is Shaytan. He talks about Shaytan a little bit. We're already at page 100, that's good. He talks about Shaytan a little bit. He starts off with those famous verses that we have in the Quran about Shaytan, that inna shaytan lil insani aduwan mubin, or wala tattabi'u khutuwati shaytan, don't follow the footsteps of Shaytan. Innahu lakum aduwan mubin, he's a clear enemy of you. أفتتخذونه وذريته أولياء من دوني وهم لكم عدو. You're going to take him and his descendants, his dhurriya, as your friends and aside from me, while they're your enemies. إن الشيطان لكم عدوا فاتخذوه عدوا. Shaitan is an enemy for you, so take him as your enemy. And these are different verses from different surahs about Shaitan. Yeah. Alam a'had ilaykum ya bani Adam alla ta'budu shaitan. We also have that verse. So there's many verses that don't worship Shaitan. Worship here doesn't mean that you pray and prostrate to him. No, you listen to him. To be an abd means to listen. So even in that verse, La ta'budu shaitan doesn't mean to not prostrate to him. No one prostrates to Shaitan except these devil worshippers. But what is meant here is that don't obey him. You see, وَأَنِ اعْبُدُونِ, and then that verse goes on to say وَأَنِ اعْبُدُونِ هَذَا صِرَاطٌ مُسْتَقِيمٌ, which shows that this is not ibadah, this is ubudiyah. There's a difference between these two. This verse that says وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, same thing. It doesn't mean I created you to worship me. I created you to be my abd. If it says La ta'budu shaitan, people weren't worshipping the devil, they were listening to him. So the opposite, this is called qarinatul muqabala, right? There's a big context clue. When you want to learn the meaning of something, the opposite of it, if you know it, you'll figure it out. La ta'budu shaitan means don't obey Shaitan. So if the verse continues and says wa ani'buduni, that means obey me, not do my worship. Worship falls under ubudiyah. So the verse that also says وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ, I only created jinn and ins for them too, it must mean obey me, be my abds. Part of obedience is worship. Because some people, they make a mistake here and they think as long as we're worshipping Allah, we're good. No, are you obeying Allah throughout the day as well? That's what we're created for. Anyway, we've talked about this before in other lectures and stuff. So he wants to talk about Shaitan here. And so he says, the first thing he says is, we have this saying in philosophy that some say, if you don't want to have anything to do with philosophical propositions, then philosophical propositions are going to have to want something to do with you. So they're going to come after you. Philosophy, whether you like it or not, will come after you. He says the same rule applies here to the akhlaqi stuff we want to talk about in Shaitan. Some people are just like, you know what, I don't want anything to do with that. But no, he's going to come for you. Right? Whether you like it or not, it's going to come for you. So he talks about this. He says, look, Allah has a plan for us, and it has three parts to it. He calls it ta'abbud, ta'aqqul, and shuhud. These three. He says for us to reach the highest levels that we can, we have to have these three. Ta'abbud, ta'aqqul, and shuhud. Ta'aqqul comes from aql. And shuhud. He says these are the three that we have that are going to contribute to our growth, our perfection. And that is exactly where Shaitan comes in. But first let us define these. Ta'abbud, he says, means that insan, that a person, when it comes to actions and practice, what they do is, they are Allah's banda, they are Allah's abd, They listen to him. This is called ta'abbud. To be an abd. Okay, I think that's clear. Ta'aqqul, he says, that is something that has to do with the mind. So it doesn't have to do with the actions of a person. That a person in their mind and in their intellect, they analyze and understand the propositions of the faith and these tenets with burhan, with proper logic, yeah, and understanding and reflection and yaqeen and acceptance of that. Once the yaqeen comes, acceptance of it. Some people had yaqeen in the past, the Quran tells us. They knew something was the truth, yet they didn't embrace it, they didn't live up to it. وَجَحَدُوا بِهَا وَاسْتَيْقَنَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُم. The Quran says there are some people that were against the signs of God. جَحَدُوا بِهَا. They were against the signs of God, but وَاسْتَيْقَنَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُم. They had yaqeen in their hearts. So yaqeen isn't enough. You have yaqeen, then that will entail you embracing that yaqeen, actually accepting it with your heart. So yaqeen isn't even enough sometimes. You have to actually live up to that. The people of the Prophet's time, the mushrikeen, knew it was the truth. Yeah, that's why they're going to be in the eternal punishment, because they knew, they had yaqeen, but they didn't accept. So acceptance is different than yaqeen even. Okay, but anyway, that's something on the side. What about shuhud? Shuhud means to see something, right? When you're a shahid, that means you've witnessed something. But shuhud, in this context, he says that you see, experience, and understand the truths and realities of the universe, or the universe of Allah, the way they really are, without, so in other words, with God. You understand God, but without something being in between you and God, that being mafahim and alfadh. You understanding God, experiencing God, but not with the help of words and terms and concepts, mafahim and alfadh. Yes, some people reach Allah not through words, not through argumentation. These urafa have this line, they say, they have this line that paya istidlal chubin bovad, something like that, which means, look, all this burhan, all of these arguments, all this logic, all this philosophy, all of these things, at the end of the day, their legs are made of wood. Can you walk if your legs are made out of wood? No, you can't get anywhere. These urafa, what they're saying is that true philosophy is good. True arguments are good. Logic is good. Learning about God through different words of the Quran even is good. But look, it's like walking with wooden legs and wooden feet. Right? You can't walk with those. In other words, you're trying too hard, but you're not going to get to the destination. It happens through shuhud. So ta'abbud, and then ta'aqqul, and then shuhud, where you don't need the help of words, the help of logic, and you're seeing the truth. Why do you don't need words to explain it? If you have a toothache, right? If you explain this toothache to others, they won't feel what you're feeling. You can't give them that pain, right? What you're going through is what you're going through. And so this is an example they use for shuhud. You are having shuhud of that pain that you have. You don't need words. You don't have to read about it. You don't have to have philosophy or anything to explain to you what it's all about, right? Same thing here. Shuhud is that you don't have anything between you and the actual mashhud, that thing which is being experienced and seen. Alright, so these are the three things that Allah will use for us, or has planned for us to use, or to go through these different stages to reach the ultimate truth, and which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. But Shaytan, what he does is he gets in the way of these. The first one is very obvious, ta'abbud, and being an abd of Allah through our practice and actions, the haram, for example. Then the ta'aqqul, we talked about this before as well, how he will come and the philosophical / logical arguments that you have in your mind, we will turn those into fallacies, erroneous fallacies. That certain, what are they called? When you have an argument, there's different premises of these arguments. He will mess with those a little bit. Sometimes the argument has the right form to it, right? But but the conclusion that you come to is wrong, it's off. Why? Because he's messed around with the premises a little bit. For example, give me an example of a word that has more than one meaning in English. Like in Farsi we have shir, right? What do we have in English? A word that has, Ram?
Like it's an animal, but you can also ram a car.
A word that has two nouns for it, not a verb and a noun. Is there anything? Whatever. It's not important. Yeah. All right. So that's also a verb and a noun. Stick. In Farsi, for example, shir means what? Milk. And it also means lion, right? Or water tap too, shira ab. So now what happens is sometimes the argument looks like a proper argument. This is a very basic example. Very, very basic example. Yeah. So this is a shir, right? And you're pointing to the tap water. And then you say, all shirs have hair, so this has hair. No. Shir in the first premise was tap water. But in the second premise was the lion, animal. You can't draw a conclusion from these two premises, right? Yeah? This is a very basic example how the form of the argument looks right, but it's yielding an erroneous conclusion. Why? Because there's a problem in the premises. Alright, so now here in ta'aqqul, we covered this before, he messes with you like that. But then the most important one was his shuhud. It says that what Shaytan will do sometimes is he'll try to mess with you so you don't see the truth the way it really is. You're trying to see and experience the truth. I will say personally, I don't think this is a possibility too much for Shaytan. Because if you're seeing truth, you're seeing truth. He can't mess around with it too much. These urafa, sometimes when they see certain things or they experience certain things, when they want to bring it into words and verbalize and talk about it, that's where the problem happens. Okay? Or else what they've experienced is really true. Putting it into words so others can share that experience, that's where the problem arises, usually. But anyway, he says here, one of the ways that he's going to mess it up is that, no, you see something, you think it's truth, but it's not. Or you just deny it altogether. Ayatollah Hassan Zada Amuli, he has a book. It's a thin book. It's one of those books that I brought from Qom. It's in Farsi though, where it's called Insan Dar Urfe Irfan. Okay? Insan Urfe Irfan Me. Right? Insan in the Urf of Irfan. In that book, it's a small little book, he shares some of his own experiences. Like he breaks the rules here. He starts talking about some of the things that he himself has experienced. And so others called him out on this. But this Ayatollah Hassan Zada Amuli, you can't call out Ayatollah Hassan Zada Amuli because he's probably better than you. Right? But he says, yeah, I know I broke the rules. Because I know I broke the rules and I'm sharing certain things that I'm not supposed to share. Right? But there's a reason for that I'm doing this, because there are so many people out there who are now just denying all forms of shuhud. And so just to let them know that no, there is such a thing, I'm going to share with you some of my own experiences of shuhud. And so he shares them in there. About when I was saying dhikr, what happened, and so on and so forth. One of them is that, I don't remember exactly, but he's talking about the dhikr that he was saying. And it reached the point where he says, I saw the whole universe saying dhikr with me as I was saying dhikr. Right? So things like that he shares. He's not supposed to share these things, but he shares them. But he says, for this reason, because I see that there are some people who are denying that there ever such things even exist. So he says here, Shaytan, sometimes he'll just convince you that, this is all nonsense. It doesn't even exist. It's not true. Or he'll convince you that it is there, but it's just too hard to reach and achieve. Yeah? And that's something that, we have even in everyday life, we want to lose that weight or gain that muscle or, be in shape, stuff like that, and it's just not worth it, it's too hard. So this one is going to definitely be hard. As a result of the hardship of the path, that you're not even going to try to traverse the path of reaching shuhud. So he shares these three with us, and these three are where the fighting happens with Shaytan, but he says the order that I just gave them to you is not the right order. And so we need to talk about that a little bit. He says the order I gave you is ta'abbud, then ta'aqqul, then shuhud. But in reality it's the opposite, he says. Shuhud, ta'aqqul, then ta'abbud, which was interesting for me as well. And I'll have a little observation here that I'll share with you as well. What is your reason for this, Al-Jawadi, that you say that it starts with shuhud and makes its way to ta'abbud, and not vice versa? He says, I'll give you a good reason for that. Shuhud means that connection that we have without the help of anything else. When you're a child even, that's when you are least aware of, that's when you're least knowledgeable. A person who's like 5 or 6 years old, 10 years old versus when they're 30 years old, right, is very different. When you're 30 years old, you're a lot more knowledgeable. And the Quran even says this. هو الذي أخرجكم من بطون أمهاتكم لا تعلمون شيئا. He brought you out of your mother's wombs not knowing anything. And that's our journey and struggle to reach everything. Alright, so we didn't know anything when we were born. So yes, a person who's 5 or 6 versus them being 30, 40 is going to be different. He says, although this child has no understanding of certain concepts, yeah, and lofty ideas, yet this child, yeah, has a connection with God and understands God. No one had to really teach them that, and even if they did teach them that, it's just something that was awakened in them that was already there as if. You know, and you see this in our kids. You see this in our kids that when you put them in the right environment from the beginning, it really yields good results. Yeah? That's why I'm always pushing for this idea of an Islamic school, right? It is wajib nowadays. It is wajib now. I don't even know what to say anymore. And inshallah our community reaches that understanding of how wajib this is over everything else. If you put the child in the right environment, it will go exponentially yield results. Why? Because the fitrah is still untouched. And so he brings this hadith here. And so this is a form of shuhud. Because we said shuhud means you take out the in-between, what's in between you and the mashhud. Yes, that thing which is being witnessed and experienced. You take words and concepts out. A child who isn't even aware of these words, these terms, all you need to do is just push them and nudge them in the right direction, and before you know it, they're speaking so godly like some of these 30-year-olds can. Right? So it shows that this is a form of shuhud. And then he brings a hadith here. He says that قال موسى بن عمران يا ربي أي الأعمال أفضل عندك. That Prophet Musa alayhi salam asked Allah, he said to him, what is the best action for you, O Allah? What do you love the most? فقال حب الأطفال فإني فطرتهم على توحيدي. What I like, one of the best things that you can do is to love the children. Why? Because I've created them with my tawheed. Or other hadiths that are famous, that look, every child is born. كل مولود يولد على الفطرة وإنما أبواه يهودانه or يهودانه وينصرانه. That I created everyone with tawheed, but it's the parents that change that child, the environment that changes that child. So the point he's trying to make is this, that from the get-go we are starting with shuhud. We are starting with shuhud, and then it'll reach a point where our minds will also develop and ta'aqqul takes place. And then after ta'aqqul takes place, action follows. He's kind of right. I think that's something to think about. It makes sense. But at the same time, we have to understand that is a minimal level. This is the observation that I had, that I said I'll share with you, that there's a minimal shuhud that we're born with. But then there's a maximum shuhud that one can attain. Right? So I would say it's like this: shuhud, ta'aqqul, ta'abbud, and then shuhud again. But a much higher grade of shuhud as a result of ta'abbud and ta'aqqul that were a result of that initial shuhud. You get what I'm saying? That's the type of shuhud that, for example, let's talk about Ayatul Bahjat a little bit. Bahjat, when you read about him, he was in his 20s and he had certain things that people in their 80s don't have. The question that I've always had in my mind, and tonight or today reading through this, I kind of felt like I got my answer finally. The question is this: Ayatollah Bahjat, what has he done in like 15, or not even 15 years, and he's in his 20s, let's say he's 23, and he's baligh when he's like 13, 14, 15, whatever. That's like 8 to 10 years. What can you do in 8 to 10 years other than become a shaheed, which he's not, he's alive? What can you achieve in 10 years of ibadah that's going to give you certain things that some people who've been doing for 60 years haven't been able to accomplish? What is it? What's going on here? There's a lot of things going on here probably, but there's one thing I felt was very important, and that is that the initial shuhud that was given to him as a child, he preserved that and used it the right way, and that eventually turned into what it turned into in his 20s. But the problem is that Shaytan comes and messes up that shuhud, that initial shuhud that Allah gives us. A person like Allah Bahjat, the conditions and circumstances, and many others maybe that we don't even know, the circumstances come together. This person is not exposed to too much crazy stuff out in the world, and so this person, Shaytan is not able to taint that pure glass or mirror that Allah has put in them that reflects Allah. And so as a result, that initial basic shuhud turns into all that great shuhud. So it's not that he did some crazy ibadat to reach that point necessarily, because I can't think of anything that you can do in 10 years to reach a point like that others have done for 50 years and they haven't made it. So it just seems like, no, there's something that Allah has put in him, he just took care of it. Yeah. And that's what Allah Jawadi says here. He says that's the first job that Shaytan tries to do, to destroy that initial shuhud that we have and put ghubar on it, to dust it up and put dust over it so it doesn't show that which it was supposed to reflect. Yeah. And what does this talk? How important does our upbringing of our children in this part of the world become? I don't want to hear somebody tell me, oh no, they have to be exposed to whatever's going on outside, because if we quarantine them, then they're not going to be ready for the outside world. Get out of my face. This is not what Islam is preaching. Show me one thing. Show me one place that it says to do such a thing. To expose them to everything from the get-go. Let that mirror shine in them. Let Allah reflect so much in them that once they get older, then they're ready for outside world. Yeah. Doesn't mean they're not going to watch TV or they're not going to have fun outside, etc., all that kind of stuff. No. This notion of, we have to understand, it's not about being exposed to the outside world or not. It's not about that. It's about more than that. It's not about, let's just be careful that this mirror is not tainted. No, this mirror can reflect more and more. Now's our chance to expand on this shuhud that this child has in them and make it as strong as possible so that this glare and light of Allah in them is so powerful. If anything else wants to make its way in, it'll push it away. Yeah? We have what it takes to fight off whatever is going to try to make its way in. Versus some people who just shatter that, unfortunately. And they think they're doing the right thing. It's very unfortunate.
Mullah Sadra also achieved a lot of things at underage.
Mullah Sadra, yeah. And others as well, yeah. Anyway, so I'm going to translate off of this one paragraph. I like it. It says, so when Shaytan takes away the shuhud of the reality and truth from a person, this person, this is so beautiful how he says it, this person becomes ma'nus with the words and concepts and all those things. Ma'nus finds solace in words and concepts now. So this person has no choice now to shift from shuhud, because Shaytan took it from him. Thank you. Shaytan took it from him. So this person has no choice but to fall back on what now? Mafahim, alfaz, words and terms to understand God. Right? Because we took away the shuhud from that child. We didn't help that child. Shaytan took it away from him or her. And so this person now has to deal with these things. And that's where error makes its way in. Once you have a wasita, once you have a medium, once you have an in-between entity between you and the mashhud, things can go wrong now. Error can make its way in. Before that, it was you and the mashhud, that which you are experiencing. It was you and the tooth pain, right? No one could ever, there is no error there. You're feeling it yourself. Even if the world tells you it's not there, you know it's there. Even if the world tells you it's at this point of pain, not that point, you know exactly how much pain you're going through. Okay? It's only when words come in between you and the mashhud. So now, I want to know what this is. If I want to know what this is, my senses have to take an image of this. It has to be processed in my mind. Someone has to tell me about it. And I still won't experience it until I drink it myself, this water bottle. Yeah? So when the words come in, it says, this causes the person to find solace in words and terms and concepts and notions and ideas. And it is clear, he says, that the mafhum and concept of things can never reflect the truth and reality of things. The aynul waqi' of things. It can't. And then he goes on to say, do you know what else is the problem? When I look at this water bottle, at the end of the day, I can have an image of it. I can have the dimensions of it in my mind. The images, the concept of this goes into my mind. I'll word it in a certain way. He says the problem is with Allah, Allah doesn't have a mahiyya, a whatness, or they call it a quiddity. Allah does not have that. So we want to bring Allah and confine Him into and restrict Him to what our terminology have. What the scope of our word, the words that we use is, confine Him in that, of course there's going to be error now. You get what I'm saying? All of this because we lost that initial shuhud. Yeah.
So, you mentioned that if we lose that initial shuhud, is there any other way of gaining it back other than the other two?
The same way we lost it. How was it lost? The Shaytan came and did his thing. Whatever it was of distractions, whatever it was of haram that I commit, everything, things like that. I'll have to fight back now. Yeah? Get rid of all of that. Focus more. Do the wajibs the way they're supposed to be done. The haram the way they're supposed to be done. Slowly, once again, that dial turns to Allah. Right? That's the only way. The only way to maintain that initial shuhud is such. But yeah, there will be some damage done. That shuhud that a child has, okay, that they lose eventually, and then they have to regain it, is not the same as it was in the beginning. And that's why Allah Bahjat turns into Allah Bahjat, I think. One of the reasons is because He doesn't let that go. Now, if it was an active thing on his part that he did, or his parents did, or the environment that he grew up was, because he grew up in some village in Shumal of Iran, Fuman. Where is Fuman? It's the Jawadis from the north of Iran. Hassan Zada Ahmadi is from the north of Iran. Bahjat from the north. There's something going on in the north of Iran. Shervin to Shumali nisti? I knew it. Even he's from the north of Iran. You know why I know? Because the ones from the north of Iran, Shumaliya, usually they're like built, you know? Kushtigira, azunjandige, you know what I'm saying? Iranian wrestlers, they come from the north of Iran. So the brother, I don't know what's in the rice there. It's not basmati rice, the Indian stuff. It's not that stuff, it's the real stuff. Alright, so anyway.
So the Aqaid that we sort of study and this argument, that sort of argument, is that sort of an attempt to undo that loss of shuhud?
I don't know what it is, but that's the next choice we have. We have no other choice. And as we grow up more and more, we have no choice. We will fall into these things, right? And that's why I say that initial stage of the childhood has to be preserved, because whether we like it or not, as we grow, we are social beings. We have to branch out. We have to look around us. We have to interact with our surroundings. And so eventually, these things will come into the picture because we don't have access, shuhudi access to everything, right? So this idea, this problem will arise eventually. The thing is that initial shuhud going to be strong enough to stay with us as well, right? So that's where the upbringing of the child is so vital. It's so important how we deal with it. One mistake, sometimes, you see this, like even kids, they'll grow up to be people who commit certain offenses in society. When you talk to them, I was abused when I was a child. Oh, one little bit of abuse as your child led to all of this abuse that is coming from you now as you grow. Everything, childhood is just, everything about a child is, you can say, somewhat shapes their future, right? And dictates what they're going to be like in the future to an extent. And so this is why it's super important. That's why we have all these hadiths about how you're supposed to deal with your children, how you're supposed to, when it comes to namaz, how to deal with them, etc., right? All I'm saying is, at least understand that this is very important before math and science even. If a person is a person of God, the math and science will also be taken care of, don't worry. The making ends meet will be taken care of, don't worry. Right? But if it's the opposite, you're on your own. You are on your own. You are your own Lord. Okay, take care of yourself then. You don't need Allah. This is what we're dealing with, I think, today. And it's something that we need to be very careful about. Anyway, it says the problem is multifold. The problem isn't only that, once we lose the shuhud, now we have to deal with the media, mediums, and those words and concepts. The problem is that Allah doesn't have a quiddity or a whatness, a form or something that we can see so that we can at least describe Him properly. So there's going to be lots of error there. There's going to be lots of error as a result, and Shaytan can do his work easier now. Yeah. And if that's affected, the ta'aqqul, then the ta'abbud is affected. Yeah, a person will fall into haram as a result of not believing in the way they're supposed to believe when it comes to Allah. Right? Sometimes these philosophers, they're the best who can prove God, but then all of a sudden you see in his normal life he's making mistakes. Why? Because he doesn't have shuhud. Shuhud is a guarantee. Other than that, logic, arguments, philosophy doesn't guarantee anything. So that's the master ultimate goal that we want to get to. Is that? Yes, you had your hand up? No? Okay, sorry. Yeah, exactly. Laysa kamithlihi shay. There is nothing like him because he doesn't have a form to begin with. He doesn't have it's not even about a physical form that we can see. When we say whatness or mahiyya, doesn't necessarily mean that can we see him or not. Mahiyya means you can't even define him. Yeah? For example, the definition in philosophy and logic for an insan is haywanun natiq. Animal that can speak and understand and things like that. No other animals are like that. Okay? Natiq, that means more than speech. It means something else. It means deeper than that. But that's our definition. What's God's definition? We can't define him. He doesn't have a mahiyya. What are you going to say? He's all wujud. That's all he is. And if he's all wujud, all of existence, then there is no distinctive characteristic that you can give him to separate him from everything else. So how are you going to understand him? The only way to understand him in his real form is shuhud. Yeah. But we have no choice. And I think that's part of this life. That we have no choice to fall into these things and then slowly pull ourselves out again through obedience of Allah, so that main shuhud that we're after, we get to it. Right? But He gave us the tool. He gave us the first push, and that's the initial shuhud. I'm sorry, I keep saying this word a lot tonight.
So after that, just nothing but shuhud.
Yeah, after death is too late though. If you shuhud, you shuhud the punishment sometimes. That's the problem. But yeah, after death it's all shuhud. لَقَدْ كَشَفْنَا عَنْكَ غِطَاءَكَ فَبَصَرُكَ الْيَوْمَ حَدِيدٌ. And when you die, the Quran says, I lift the veil off of your eyes. Now your sight is very sharp. 2020. Now you see everything the way it really was, but that wasn't the point. And so he says that these three things that we talked about is one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that Shaytan, the way he tries to misguide us, is what he says in the Quran himself, where it says, Shaytan explicitly says, لَأَقْعُدَنَّ لَهُمْ صِرَاطَكَ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ ثُمَّ لَآتِيَنَّهُمْ مِنْ بَيْنِ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ وَعَنْ أَيْمَانِهِمْ وَعَنْ شَمَائِلِهِمْ. That he said, look, oh Allah, I'm going to sit at this Sirat al-Mustaqim and wait for these people. I'm going to wait for them. And once they come, I'm going to approach them from بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ, from in front, and from behind, from their right and from their left. So Ayatollah Jawadi has an interpretation of this. He says, look, first of all, the heart doesn't have this geography of left, right, front and back. Not the physical heart we're talking about here. When it says the heart, of course it means what? The soul. Or some people like to call it the mind. Okay, that's the secular way of saying soul, the mind. Anyway, He says, so what is meant by this is something metaphorical, not something haqiqi. It's metaphorical. So front, back, left and right, what does that mean? He says, Ayatollah Jawadi says, through his throwing batil in our way, he scares us of the future in front of us, of the past that we had behind us, of our strengths even that we have, which is yamin, the right hand. Usually people are right-handed. No offense to any left-handed people here. We have one. We need to get some left-handed desks, by the way. Some people have brought that to my attention. One of the brothers, he said that once. Anyway, he's not here tonight. The yamin signifies strength, and the left signifies weakness. So Ayatollah Jawadi says that's how he's going to try to get us as well. Well, give me an example for strength. He says, for example, a person who has a very high position is a king, for example, strong individual, he will use that against us. It's obvious how. Through the arrogance that comes from that. Through us doing dhulm to others and so on. It becomes their means of ghurur. He says, but when you look, there were people before this person who were much more powerful. The Quran says, وَمَا بَلَغُوا مِعْشَارَ مَا آتَيْنَاهُمْ. These mushrikeen of Mecca who think they're all that, there were people before them that these mushrikeen don't have a tenth of what they had. Mi'ashar. They don't have a tenth of what they had, and we destroyed all of them. So this should not be a reason for you to get arrogant and think that there's something special about you. He says, what about weakness? He says, for example, a person who needs to do amr al-ma'ruf and nahi an al-munkar, when it's wajib, of course, weakness shouldn't be a reason for them to not do it. Why? Because you're doing this while you're connected to the all-powerful, which is Allah. Allah says, I want you to do this. I want you to do this. That means if you're doing it for Him, then you are coming from a point of strength actually, although you might be weak. And so when Musa went to Fir'aun, and he wanted to do Amr Ma'ruf of Fir'aun, Allah promised him, He says, look, Inni ma'akuma asma'u wa ara. I'm with you, don't worry, I'm watching, I'm listening. So these are examples of, what Shaytan does. One thing that he also does, he says, and I think we'll end after that, is that he brings for you freedom. Just like how America took democracy to the Middle East. Democracy to the Middle East, and thousands and thousands and thousands of people dying. And then when they do want to exercise their democracy, and their parliament votes that we want the US out of Iraq, they say we're not leaving. And this is the democracy that they bring for us. Alhamdulillah. One of those alhamdulillahs. So one of the things that Shaytan brings for us is freedom, he says. Freedom. Is it always good? Or is it something that's not always good? Freedom, Shaytan makes it seem like freedom, he says. And so Shaytan will tell you that I bring for you the idea of you can do whatever you like, whatever feels good is okay, and so on and so forth. Why? Because this is freedom. Now I'm gonna add to what Agha Jawadi says. I want to say he doesn't just bring you freedom. He brings you humanism itself, and human-centeredness of the universe. What do I mean by that? That everything the human being wants, that is not something that is okay. It is the truth itself, actually. This humanism that they talk about, whatever you want, whatever you say, whatever you feel, that is actually truth. That means truth becomes relative to you. Sometimes you say, hey, you're free to do whatever you like, although what you're doing is batil. But you can do whatever you like. Do you think that in this part of the world, it's not illegal to, if you're in a relationship with somebody, to all of a sudden go to somebody else? It's not illegal, but is that something that's not frowned upon? It's frowned upon, right? Sometimes you look at it like that, something that's wrong, eventually, although you're free to do it, but it's wrong. Sometimes no. And I think this is where we're headed right now. Shaytan says, no. It's not that you're free even. Is this what you like? Then that is the haqq. That's what it's come to. It's not that batil, you're doing batil, but it's okay. You can do batil. It says you like it, it's haq then. Yeah? How do you feel? How do you see things? And so on and so forth. There are endless examples of this. Endless of examples. And Western sociologists and even psychologists have pushed. It's not just something recent. This will go back to maybe 100 to 200 years ago, maybe even, of this idea. Yeah, that it's everything revolves around you. Haqiqah revolves around you. Be you, in a sense. Because why? Because being you equals haq. Okay. But he says that if this is what's going on, then what goes out the window is Allahu nurus samawati wal ard. Yeah? Nur goes out, and Allah being the nur of samawat and ard goes out the window. Because now it's all batil. If batil is there, there's no haq, there's no nur anymore. And when the Allah goes out the window, is that really freedom? Freedom, he says, his definition of freedom is anything that has to do with truth, actually, not falsehood. So, he makes this point. He says, look, I just want to talk about this freedom. He says, do we know anybody who is not able to sin? No. Everyone out there is able to sin. No one comes and brags about how, hey people, look at how I'm able to sin. Being able to sin is not something to be proud about because everyone can do it. Right? What he wants to say, Ayatollah Jawadi, is that when you're actually free, no, you're actually in chains. You're actually in the shackles of your own desires. You're not free enough to go against what you want. That's what's really happening. What's your reason for that? What's your sign? What is a good sign of this? He says the fact that everyone can sin if they like. It's not something that you can show off about, right? No one shows off about how they can overeat and get fat. People show off about how they can go, practice self-restraint, right? Everyone's all about that. These athletes that are super successful, yeah, what makes them so good and successful? The fact that they don't party like other athletes, and they become, super athletes, while others become nobodies. Just last night I saw a clip of an ex-NBA player. He's like on the streets, and they've cuffed him, and he's like just shouting out profanity. This guy used to be like an NBA star, maybe even, but the guy has reached the point like this. Why? Because he thought he was free. But when you listen to whatever you want to do, as a matter of fact, you are chaining yourself up more and more with the sin, and even with the social implications and ramifications of what you're doing. You are chaining yourself up more and more. But as I said before, as he said, Ayatollah Jawadi before, Shaytan is al-musawwil. He does taswil. He makes that which is not good seem good to you. Before you know it, you're all chained up. And so Ayatollah Jawadi, he says, you don't find anybody bragging about how they can sin. That's something everybody can do. Even the lowest of lowest animals, too, all human beings are able to sin. That's not something to brag about. Because sinning is surrounded by the shahawat. Inna nar huffat bishahawat. Nahjul balagha. That the fire is surrounded by the pleasures. Right? Pleasure is not something hard. Everyone's after pleasure. It's not a problem. That's why having this ability, freedom, this freedom that Shaytan brings you, he says, I am bringing you freedom. What is your definition of freedom, Shaytan? That you're able to do anything you like. He says this is not going to be an actual blessing. This is not going to be a prize that he brings you, something that you can be happy about. No. He says this is something that any person that's illiterate, any animal that's vahshi, tamed, untamed can do. That's what Shaytan is offering you. He is offering you, hey, I'm giving you the opportunity to be just like untamed wild beasts out there. Yeah. So all of this is Shaytan, but let's not forget, Inna kayda Shaytan kan da'ifa. That Shaytan's kaid is da'if. At the end of the day, Allah says in the Quran, he's weak. If he's weak, show me the way to defeat him. Win the battle against Shaytan. Allah says, hey, it's not going to be as hard as you thought, theoretically speaking though. In theory, it's not very complicated. Because sometimes you want to win a game, you have to score more points, right? He says this isn't going to be like that. This fight with Shaytan, he brings a hadith from Imam Ali, where he says, alayhi salam, he says, صَافُ الشَّيْطَانِ بِالْمُجَاهَدَةِ وَغْلِبُوهُ بِالْمُخَالَفَةِ. You can beat Shaytan just by going against what he says. Don't think you have to do anything additional. You know, sometimes not losing can equal winning. Here is one of them, he says. The whole victory against Shaytan is what lies in what just not doing what he says. That's it. So as I said, in theory it's easy. It's hard. It gets harder in practice, but it's okay. Allah's on our side and Allah helps those who try. But we have to understand, at least in theory, let's get it right. That if you want to go against Shaytan, going against him and winning against him means just not listening to him, just not losing to him. Don't worry about the rest. The rest Allah will take care of. تَزْكُوا أَنفُسُكُمْ وَتَعْلُوا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ دَرَجَاتُكُمْ. If you do this part, just don't lose to him. What happens as a result? Your nafs will be purified, your souls will be purified. Who's going to do that for me? Allah is. You don't got to do anything. Don't think you have to do anything extra there. And تَعْلُوا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ دَرَجَاتُ. Your darajat and ranks before Allah's eyes are going to go up as a result of that. So just not losing to him equals winning to him. And then Jawadi just rubs in our face a little bit. He says, listen, just letting you know, since Allah has said he's a weak enemy, if you lose to him though, you lost to a weakling. What does that say about you? He's like trying to get us hyped up and pumped up, you know. I'll show you, Agha Jawadi, that I'm not weak, you know. But then he ends with this. This is our last point, promise. He says, look, if he's the weakling, if Shaitan's weak, why is it that fighting him and fighting the nafs is referred to as Akbar? Anybody have any ideas? While I drink my water. Mm-hmm.
Relatively weak.
Huh?
Relatively weak.
No. The Quran didn't say relative. You added that part yourself. It said, "Inna kayda shaytan kana da'ifa." He has nothing really over you.
Is it about fear that we can work?
No, huh? What do you mean?
We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to put some time to take us from Jannah.
Yeah, but he's sitting there. But Allah says, even though he's sitting there, he's going to come from back, front, left, and right. Still, he's da'if. He can't really accomplish much. Yes.
On the day of judgment, he's going to say, "I only invited you. You're the one who."
Okay, so that makes him weak.
I had no control over you.
Exactly. So he's weak. The question is, why is the fight against them though referred to as al-jihad al-akbar, the great struggle?
It's your nafs actually that is referred to as jihad, yeah? It's your nafs.
Alright, so he's using your nafs, okay? He's using your nafs.
Shaitan is only putting the waswasa in your nafs.
Mm-hmm.
You are the one who's acting.
Exactly, that's one point to make, that yes, what you're really fighting is not Shaitan, you're fighting yourself. But he makes another couple points here.
Because
He just wants to be smart, yeah?
because Allah is powerful. Because if you're relying on Him, that will make Him.
That's also something good, yes.
Is it because Al-Azkar is a symptom of Shaitan itself, is the correct one? Like one is like the cause and one's like the effect.
My brain's not working right now, I don't know. What you,
So,
Jihad al-Asghar is what?
so like that is a symptom. Like Shaitan causes the conflict which leads to people fighting.
Oh no. We're just talking about al-Akbar right now. Only there. Forget about what caused it or anything like that. Why is this referred to as al-Akbar when the enemy is weak? And the enemy is using nafs against us. Yeah, so what you said is it holds, and we've talked about this before. He adds a couple of things here that I found also to be nice. He says, I also had something that was I said once in Jummah in the dua about Shaitan from Sahifa Sajjadiyah, that he is da'if, but what makes it so great, and I think that's what Al-Jawadi is actually saying too, that what's at stake is so significant and so important that if you lose this, you've lost everything. If you lose in the minor jihad, you lost your life, but did you lose your akhirah? No. But here, if you lose everything. You might even lose your life too. Who cares though? If you don't lose your life, you're going to live for another 50, 60 years, 100 years, but you lost eternity. So that's one. And two, he adds as well. He adds that, what you just said that it's true that Shaytan is weak, but he has so many weapons to use, right? He has so much to work with, and the battlefield that he has is so big that it's hard to chase this dude down, you know? Yeah. So because of that, the nafs that he uses is it has so many different colors to it, so many different shapes and forms, so many different things that we desire that he can use. That's what makes the fight against him so hard. So he's da'if. Yeah. He's da'if, but if you don't take him serious, I give this example once. You hear a little chewing sound on your, what's it called? Your bookshelf. A little bit of chewing sound. Whatever that is, whatever. Oh, it's a couple termites, whatever. Right? Termites are weak, you can just squash them. Huh? But then, if you don't squash them, after 10 days, 20 days, you're sleeping under that bookshelf, the ilm that you have in the bookshelf falls on you, and you die as a result of that. He was weak, but since you didn't take him serious, yeah, the damage can be done. If Shaytan is not taken serious, he can do major damage. So he's small, damage is big. This is why this struggle, it makes this struggle so important and so great and so hard, because of all the weapons he also has. Okay. Any questions? Yes?
That's same thing with Amir al-Mu'min Ali ibn Abi Talib mentioned in Dua al-Hasim, say Ya Ghawthar, bika ya Allah min hawm qad ghalabani wa min aduwwin qad istakbara alayhi wa min dunya qad tazani wa min nafsina ma
Ahsant, yes.
It's like 4 against me.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, there's Shaytan has so much to use. What were they? Dunya is one. What was the other one? My nafs. What else was it? Hawa. Huh? So all these things. But, you know, that's the point of this life. We have 60, 70, 80, 100 years to get it right, inshallah. So if I'm 20 years old and I mess up, it's not the end of the world. What is the end of the world is when I actually leave this dunya being the same 20-year-old that I was when I'm 80 years old, when I'm 60. If you die at 20, Allah will deal with you the way He won't deal with you the way He deals with that 80-year-old. Yeah. The Quran has a verse. Let me see if you know this verse, sister. This verse, because I don't remember the words right now, brother. If anyone, the verse that says that we take your life, then when they're taking somebody's life, the person might say, "Why are you taking my life, O Allah?" He says, "Didn't I give you the amount of years to live that you needed?" What is the verse? No, I don't remember any of the terms in Arabic. Awalam nu'ammir, or I don't know. I don't remember the verse. But anyway, that verse says that when this person, when the people they object, like, "Oh Allah, why?" He says, "Didn't I give you enough time?" So this enough time, some people die in their teens even. Some people die in their 20s even. Is that enough time versus a person who's 80? It's not the same. That's why Allah understands it's not the same. So He will have the expectations of a 20-year-old for a 20-year-old, not for an 80-year-old who had a chance to really train themselves but still didn't. So a 20-year-old, if a 20-year-old, for example, I'm not speaking on God's behalf here, if they got it right 1 out of 10 times, or 2 times out of 10 times, they might be in better shape than an 80-year-old who got it right 7 out of 10 times. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. So something like that. But once again, Allah's rahmah is just something we can't really talk about. Who knows what He's going to do? I mean, that teenager might be off the hook completely. We don't know really. We don't know about that. Yeah. Anything else before we end? Okay. Thank you. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.